Our town, Parishville, New York, nestled in the foothills of the beautiful Adirondack mountain range. For centuries, an Akwesasne Mohawk hunting ground. First settled in 1810 by Luke Brown of Vermont. Founded in the year 1814 by the wealthy landowner David Parrish, and populated by some very special folks, namely us.
My name's Susan Jackson Q.
Okay, Susan Jackson Q. What is your connection to Parishville, New York?
Well, in 1972, my then husband came to Potsdam to teach, and I had two little children, and we wanted to live out in the country, and we lived way up in Catherineville. We strung up for, I think it was $2,500, the power line going up there, and I was enthralled with being there. I just loved it. Flash forward, we were in Potsdam for quite some time. I was so lucky to travel so much. In my travels, I met my husband, Rafael Quinones, who's Cuban. So now, would you believe, we live on the flow in Parishville, bottom right at the end of the flow, closest to what we call the bubble factory. Other people call the penstock. We've lived there in the summertime, and we go to Cuba in the wintertime. And my son Seth has climbed Mount Everest and done wonderful things and lives in Seattle, and my wonderful daughter and two grandchildren live in Messina. I just am excited about being involved with the museum because I think it's so important to preserve and to use our history. Not just, we don't want to just preserve, we wanted the kids to hear about it. We want to learn from our elders, and I'm just so thankful to be involved in a community that cares.
And you are Joe McGill?
Joe McGill. I'm the newly appointed historian of Parishville.
Wonderful. Show me the museum.
Okay, come on in. Okay, these are the curators of the museum since we opened in the early 60s. Rosabelle Mishaw and Hilda Bassett. Next one is Ruth Bisnet. Bessie Duffy. Last was our historian Elsie Brzee. And since then, we used to have separate curator and historian, but in the last 15 years, 20 years, it's been the same position, curator and historian.
Emma Remington, Museum Curator Historian, 1978 to 2014.
Do you want me to tell you about the gorge?
Yes.
The first building was probably of a sawmill, and it was built in 1810. There was the upper sawmill and a lower sawmill. The upper one was more or less up on this main street, but the lower one was way below the gorge bridge. So they built the two sawmills. They built a grist mill. They built a machine shop, a blacksmith shop, and then they built a distillery. But the distillery caught fire and it didn't last very long. But they immediately built another distillery. And there was a few other smaller mills, but they weren't worth mentioning really. But there was a boarding house down there. Well, my grandfather and grandmother, after they got married, they moved to Parishville. And the first place they lived was in the boarding house. And I was 4 years old when my grandfather died, but I was married when my grandmother died. And she used to tell me about all these things in Parishville. And she said, oh, I couldn't stand it in that boarding house because she said the walls were paper thin. And she said everybody's business was, everybody knew everything. And there was no secrets nor nothing. You could hear everything.
So people have donated things from their houses.
We were fortunate that we opened when we did, because the townspeople, when they learned of a museum being opened, just cleaned out their attics and donated everything that they had. Antiques didn't have the value that they have now. A little history of the house. The earliest owner of the house was Nathan Bartlett. He was a lawyer. He sold the house to Pliny Clark, who was a local businessman, around the year 1900, and all this beautiful woodwork is part of the remodel that the Clark family had done prior to moving into the house.
And they lived here.
They lived here.
Oh.
And the Clark family is actually the family that donated this building to the town. I don't know what you'd call this room, but I do know all of the Clark children were born in this room. And we use it to display these beautiful hand-carved circus wagons and horses. These were all made by a man by the name of Everett Frederick, who was just a local resident. This was his hobby. This is what kids remember that come here.
Absolutely. What is your favorite part about living in Parishville?
I live really close to the beach, so I can walk down to it every day.
Excellent. And you are, say your name?
Ben Cray.
And Jack, what is your favorite?
I like Parishville because I live right on the post office and it's so easy to get the mail.
Betty Behay, 23 years Parishville postmaster, 1979 to 1992.
Yeah, I was going to church one Sunday morning and I looked over at the post office and here's a big hole in the window. On the way back from church, I stopped to see what was going on and somebody had thrown a cue ball through the window Saturday night. And another time, we were sorting mail and I heard a gunshot. Okay. Somebody had fired a BB gun at a dog and missed and went through the window.
Okay, so the window has had a hard life in the post office.
Yeah. Same window.
My favorite part of Parishville is that I live right next to my neighbor and I get to play with him all the time.
And who is your neighbor?
Peyton.
What kind of games do you and Peyton like to play?
We sometimes play on our bikes.
Mm-hmm. What do you do on your bikes?
We just ride around.
You like to ride around. What do you do? Do you ride bikes, you guys?
Yep. Yeah.
And what do you like to do on your bikes? Do you do tricks?
Yeah. Not really, but sometimes.
What kind of tricks?
Wheelies, jumps, skids.
Do you crash up and get hurt sometimes?
Not really.
That's good. Tell me something about your childhood, Parishville childhood.
The town kids, we always would play one side of the river against the other side. I mean, we were all friends, we all went to school together, so whether it be football, basketball, baseball, hockey, didn't matter, whatever sport, hide and go seek. It was summertime, you went to the beach, you had morning program, went to the beach and had swimming lessons and came home.
What did you do in the fall and the winter?
I mean, between school and if we played sports or whatever, wintertime, hockey, snowmobile, if you're lucky enough to have a snowmobile. I mean, this is in the 70s and 80s, you know, I mean, not everybody had toys like that back then.
But we all had the river.
Our last town doctor, Dr. Bailey.
It was his hope that through the use of tape recordings, written documentation, and photographs, he could develop an organization aimed at helping others to remember the contributions of everyday life instead of just letting them be forgotten.
History doesn't just belong to the buildings surrounding a town, he once said. It belongs to the people, what kind of people they were, what they did for work and for fun. He said life is so unsure and death can come at any moment. One should not be afraid of it, but prepare for it. That is one reason I want to record it. I'm Joan Thaler Doby. I was 4 years old when I came to Parishville in 1950 with my 6-year-old sister Ellen, our mother Angela, and our father, Dr. Max Thaler, who had found Parishville in an ad in a medical magazine. We were a refugee family from Hitler's Europe. Parishville needed a doctor, and we needed a home. For the next 40 years, and 2 children, David and Susanna, and 7 grandchildren later, our father served as the local doctor, and also, in his heart, historian.
I remember going there as a child, and in my early adult years, it was always, you never had to have an appointment, just people walked in and he saw everybody, first come, first serve. Wish things were still kind of like that, but I also remember him making house calls when I was really young. We had a farm over near Hopkins, and when we were sick, he would actually come to the house to see us, and those days are long, long gone.
I thought your father was wonderful.
Oh,
So did my husband.
Yes, I can remember going and visiting your mom with a new doctor who just came to the area, Gary Burke, and your mother was very welcoming. And she sat us down, and we may have had tea, and she was just telling him, giving him nice advice, because he was a family doctor, he wasn't a specialist. And he was working in the small town of Herman, which was not dissimilar.
When I was little, I lived on the hill on what is Catherine Street. And my grandpa lived next door, Erie Converse. And when I was 4, Dr. Thaler came to see if he was going to like to live here. And my grandma was sick, so I met Dr. Thaler. And Dr. Thaler told me that he would be moving with 2 children, Joni and Ellie. So they were coming from New York. Remember, I'm 4. And I lived 2 houses up from them. So on the day they were coming from New York, I sat on the step of what is the Thaler house. I sat there all day with my Kool-Aid and peanut butter sandwich. And my mother came down and says, "Do you really want to sit here?" Of course. Noreen Forrest, also checked on me, "Do you want to sit here?" Well, I already knew that Joni and Ellie were coming, and Joni was like 6 months younger than I, and Ellie was a year and something older than I. So finally, this was before the throughway, the Thailers showed up and I met the Thailers. And of course, the backyard connected to the hill which led to my house. And from then on, I was basically half the time at the Thailers' house, perhaps more.
I had no car. I was like, and my kids were running around in the old house. We were fixing with the help of Al Grobler, Pete Valance. These wonderful men came up, virtually lived with us, introduced us to their families. And in the midst of all this, my little Seth climbed up into the medicine cabinet and drank his mom's eardrops. And Mr. Grobler rushed me down to Dr. Thaler. And Mrs. Angela Thaler greeted me, called poison control, which rapidly assured her that there was no big danger to the child. And this lovely grandfather man pulled me aside and said, "And why do you need these eardrops?" And I said, "Because I have so much wax I can't hear a thing, and you know, I'm getting crazed because I can't hear." And he said, "I will clean your ears." And Mrs. Angela Thaler pulled me aside and took the kids and fed them soup and told me their daughter Joan was coming to Parishville with 2 little kids same age. And they were just wonderful family.
My grandparents lived here. They moved here, I think, in 1950. And I spent my childhood coming here every weekend, practically. And it was always really fun. I got all excited driving here again today, going past all the landmarks. It was especially fun because my cousins, Don and Andy, lived next door for a good amount of time. We didn't have TV at home, so Grandma and Grandpa had TV. So that was a really big, exciting thing. And when I spent the night, I slept in an upstairs bedroom that faced Dawn's bedroom, and we weren't allowed to turn on the television until Grandma woke up, which was probably about 10 o'clock. She was a very late sleeper. So we had secret hand signals. We would signal to each other through the window, and then we'd sneak down and turn on the television very, very low so no one would hear it. And then Grandpa would come and get us breakfast. He would bring us cereal and milk, like sugar cereal that we didn't have at home. And we'd silently watch the cartoons and slurp our cereal, and Grandpa would get us a little blanket and cover us up.
This room is the kitchen with the original cooking stove.
Dwayne Smith wrote a memoir, Memories of Catherinesville.
This was probably my first memory of Catherinesville.
Okay.
My own memory. And Grandma and Grandma Smith were still living up there at the farm. Mom, Dad, and I, of course, would go up to visit them a lot. And we were up there one evening, and I don't know how old I was. I couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 if I was that. And I remember going into the house, and I knew Grandma had a big jar up in the cupboard, and she had these homemade big sugar cookies, you know, white sugar cookies.
Yeah, yeah.
They were, I loved them, you know. And I went in and I remember asking her if I could have one. And Mom and Dad kind of tried to scold me a little bit at first, you know, and they said, well, you know, it's not polite, you shouldn't do that. And again, the things you remember is so clear. As late as today, Grandma just laughed and she said, no, she says, don't scold him, it's my fault. Says I've told him before that anytime he comes up, if he wants one, just ask for it.
All right.
And they said, well, that was all right. Then I remember she gave me one.
Okay, thanks.
And that is my first memory of Catherinesville. Dad was born up in Catherinesville himself.
Wow.
He showed me one day, we were wandering around up there, it was in the early 50s. The house was still there, the farmhouse. And we stopped there and he pointed to the back of the house and he said there was a bedroom there. And he said, I was born right there in that bedroom in 1909.
Was born here, just down across from the schoolhouse, a few years ago. A couple years ago, yeah, just a few. See, Dr. Duffy was the, as I understand, was the doctor that delivered us.
Okay.
He was a good old man. We'd go over to his office for school, during school, and get our shots and exams, and then he always made all kinds of house calls, same as your dad did.
Mm-hmm.
He was a little rough, but he was a good doctor. He was very concerned for his patients.
Paul Campbell, Parishville, game warden.
I think because he died when I was young, of course, he's the hero of my life. He was a game warden.
In Parishville?
In Parishville. I don't really know how big his district was, but there was, a district. This works that way. His partner was Lyle Lalone from Colton. And our house was always filled, when something was up, with game wardens, sheriffs, troopers, and policemen if there was something major going on. And I just grew up with the law enforcement, which to me I think was a good thing, because when I grew older and people had negative things to say about law enforcement, how could I? They were always in my house. So, and I never found anything wrong. They were just people like everybody else, and their job was their job.
I remember my great-grandmother, that her name probably in the record here somewhere was Etta Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
She was married to a George Jenny. He died in 1918 up there in the farm. But she was born in 1858, and she lived till 1955. She remembered as a little girl, about the same age I was, and she told me, she said that she saw soldiers gathering together in Parishville to march off to war.
Wow.
And I said to Grandma, I said, what war was that? And she looked at me, she says, oh, I thought it was a Civil War.
My parents were both from Parishville. My father, Bob Waite, was born up on Chapel Hill. And my mother was born in the big white house down at the foot of White Hill, across from the spring house.
What was her name?
Chestina Taylor.
Oh, okay.
And they were childhood sweethearts, and they got married, obviously, and I'm the result.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
No brothers and sisters. I'm an only child. And sometime in the late 30s, my parents bought a place at Joe Indian.
Okay.
And they ran a boys camp there for some 3 or 4 years.
All right.
And when the war came, they...
Which war?
The Second World War came. They couldn't get the food because of the rationing. They had trouble with that, so they fixed the bunk houses up to be cabins to rent. And they were both teachers. And I have some very fond memories of, we'd come up every summer for the whole summer vacation and rent the cottages and stay in the big camp.
Up at Joe Indian. Okay.
And we always stopped to visit my grandmother and Uncle Elwood down at the foot of the hill.
Lived here 27 years. I go back to when I used to spend time up here with my grandmother, back 60 years.
And who was your grandmother?
Helen McNasser. She taught school here in Parishville amongst a lot of the country schoolhouses, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And she lived up on George Street. And I used to spend quite a bit of time up there.
And I was born and brought up at the other end of Pickettville. And I went to school Pickettville, the old Pickettville school, and Belva Hennigan was my first teacher. And we had, I think we went 6th grade, and one teacher for 6 grades.
How many kids?
15, 20 probably. All in one room.
All in one room.
Yeah. We had one little cloakroom, we called it, and hung our clothes and coats up in that, and a big jar with a spigot on it. And that's what we had for water. We had to fill that up every morning.
The kids did that?
Yeah, some of us kids had to do it. We took turns. And we had no wood stove. We had the wood out in the shed in the back. And the kids used to bring the wood in for the teacher and everything. Keep the fire going. Each family every day would change off, bring something in like a bowl of soup or some kind for lunch, so everybody could share. It was great. We had a very good time.
In 1954, a dancing teacher came to town, and soon enough, we all were dancing.
Touch my hair as you pass my chair. Little things we love.
And do you go to school here?
Yep.
And who is your favorite teacher?
Miss Mason. Miss Mason. Miss Wilkes.
Miss Brooks?
Miss Wilkes.
Miss Wilkes, okay. And what makes her so cool?
She does activities with us.
What kind?
Like crafts.
She does crafts with you. You paint, you cut things out?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And what does your favorite teacher do with you?
When we go down to the beach, she brings like watermelon, and we eat it all together. Mm-hmm.
That's the best part?
Pretty much.
And is she good to all the students?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And does she teach you arithmetic?
No.
What does she teach you?
Times and plus all sorts of fun facts. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Tell me something you remember from your childhood.
I remember going to school here in Parishville, and the schoolyard had huge maple trees, and that the roots were above the ground. It was anyway. Whenever I see maple trees, I always think they're ground feeders, you know, because of that, I think. Yeah. And I just remember going to Bonan's store and Wilcox's store.
Oh yeah.
And buying penny candy.
Yeah.
Yes, and Hoyt's store.
Yeah.
I love to frequent the stores downtown. It was that was our treat, to be able to go and get bubble gum or balloons at the store.
Janet Banan of Banan's General Store. What was it like opening a store here in Parishville?
It was busy, a lot different than it is today, for sure. Just a lot of nice people, and we had just about a little bit of everything. And at that time, people you carried people from payday to payday usually, and most people were very wonderful about paying when they should, and it was neat.
How long did you have the store?
We started in the 60s, and it was in the 80s when we sold out.
Where Banan's store stood, now stands the AmVets. And up the hill, and down another, is Parishville Hopkinton Central School. Conrad Cook drove school bus for 15 years.
And my family's all here. From Kathy's from Boston, and Big Lori is from south of Seattle, and Tracy is from Kansas City,
Missouri.
And little Lori is from North Syracuse with her husband John. And Austin lives, have 2 apartments and a house. Their son Mike has the bigger part, and Austin's the younger son.
And all of us, says Kathy, went to Parishville Hopkinton Central School. 3 generations of us.
Barn burned in 2004, June 26. The tractor caught fire, and everything was gone within a few minutes.
It was a beautiful barn. It was like a land
Yeah,
barn.
we just got done. Rodney Voltra was a carpenter, contractor time. He just got done making the place really beautiful.
Beautiful.
So in 3 weeks, tractor caught fire in the night and the barn burned, and we lost basically all the young cattle, so we decided it's time to switch operations.
So what
we had
did
an
you?
auction, sold the cattle and kept the farm, and now we grow soybean and alfalfa baleage, mostly to feed deer in the wintertime at hunting camps and hunting clubs type business.
Hunting season at the Bucket, aka the Dugway Tavern.
Some of my favorite people I met through my high school years, I decided to take to 10 Bar at the Bucket, much to my mother's horror. But I did it anyway. And you met the locals in a way that you wouldn't normally meet them at the grocery store or at the post office or something like that. And I got to know people in a deeper level, perhaps, or on that level, for sure. And one time at the Bucket, there was this quote, this hunting season. Now that was the time to work at the Bucket. So much fun. It was back in the time when you could serve 10 beer at one time because you could go put each finger into a beer bottle and carry it over the table and put it down. Of course, today that wouldn't meet health standards at all. But who cared? It was hunting season. Anyway, these men knew me well. And there was women there too, but mostly men, because it was hunting season. And this young man came in who was, who knows who he was, don't know. Here I am, an 18-year-old with hair to my waist, which was bleached, but I was still conservative because I have my mother's upbringing as well. And anyway, he came behind the bar. Well, it was Ralph Merkley, Eddie Norman, somebody else, I can't remember. They jumped the bar because nobody goes behind the bar to get near me. And I knew from then on, no matter where I was or what I was doing, I was protected.
Well, time passed, and in time, the Bucket became the home of Sunfeather Soap.
Sandy, Maine.
Okay, Sandy, and of course you're famous as the creator of the Sunfeather Soaps.
Yes, I guess you could say that.
Tell me how that happened and how did you do it and so on.
Well, it grew out of my love for medicinal and fragrance herbs and also wanting to have a livelihood of my own. I started my soap business in my kitchen and I started it with $15 and it grew a lot faster than I had planned, and then it just became difficult to keep up with it, and all of a sudden I didn't even have time to go camping anymore. And then I had 4 children, and we have made our home up on the Sylvan Falls Road about 5 miles from the village of Parishville. And I did have my soap business in that farmhouse for about 5 years before it outgrew the house. And then I moved it to Route 11B, and then about 7 years later I moved it to the old Dugway Tavern, which is right outside of Parishville, and that's where our home is today.
Your home or the home of the soap?
The home of the soap business.
Yeah, yeah. So you're still keeping it up, it's still going?
Yes, I grew the business. We had about 24 employees in our hayest day, and then when the recession hit, over half of our customers went out of business, and it threw the business into a bit of a spin. But fortunately, I was able to pull us out of that by taking on a lot of private label business, and we went down to about 6 employees, and then someone made me an offer for the business, a large company in Utah, and it was a very good offer, so I sold my brand to them, the Sunfeather brand and the Bug Off brand, and now they rent my facility, and we are still manufacturing soap for them and doing private label for other customers. And just this year I launched a new line, a new business called Adirondack Fragrance and Flavor Farm. And this business is all about taking things from my farm that I grow or wildcraft and extracting the scents and then making perfumes and colognes and soaps out of those things.
So, what do you want to do when you grow up?
I want to be a professional instrumentalist.
Which instrument?
So I want to do clarinet and violin. Well, I want to learn all the instruments.
Do you want to stay here as a musician in Parishville?
Yes and no. I
Why?
like the neighborhood and the school district, but I want to go to a very good college, like a really good college or whatever.
I hope you have your dreams come true.
My grandmother played piano, and her husband, my dad's father, died when my father was 5. So she remarried, and he played violin and sax.
Wow.
And my father played saxophone. And they used to do the band circuit, like the Red Tavern on Saturday night, or
Nice.
something like. They traveled around.
Artist and guitar maker Tracy Cox lives in Parishville and creates inlay designs on the guitars he makes and sells worldwide.
I've been building guitars for about 8 years. I started creating inlay artistry on guitars. I worked for several years at the Martin Guitar Factory, and then because living outside of Parishville was such, well, it wasn't something that my family enjoyed. We really longed to move back, so when I moved back to Parishville, I set up a shop at my home, and I've been building guitars and creating custom inlay from my home studio, right here in Parishville.
Nice. That is beautiful.
One of the fantastic opportunities about living in Parishville is I get to build out of local wood. So there are a ton of people, local sawyers and farmers and people that have just had wood stacked up in their barns, and they just call me up, or I bump into them and they say, like, I use their wood for building the guitars. This is all local maple. Obviously the ebony's not local, but local spruce, local maple, and you know, wood is just absolutely wonderful. Sounds beautiful. So
It is a beautiful sound. How much do you sell them for?
they sell for between $2,500 and say $25,000. So there's every price point, every level. This was a guitar that I was commissioned by a local gentleman here in Potsdam, and you know, I chose to build all local wood. It's just absolutely a wonderful guitar.
In the North Country woods.
Grandfather Start, I worked at Lake Azonia with him growing up. My other grandfather, Fred Purrier, was from, which I live on his old farm now, down on the High Flats Road, and he had worked for the county in the reforestation, had the draft horses. I remember going with him as a child also. He would take us wherever he was working on the weekends, and we'd get to ride the horses back into the woods, and he'd just get the logs back out, and that was a lot of fun.
And I remember when the logs came down the river and they had a big, what they called a boom across right by the bridge, and the logs came down. They cut them way above and sent them down. They picked them up there and put them in the trucks, and away they went.
Memories of being a game warden's daughter.
My father would take me into the woods, and I remember, and I don't know who the person was, but my father would know people who probably World War II vets. Not sure, because I was little. But we would go deep in the woods, and my father would bring things like food items for these people. And one, I was told by my father we were going way, way back, and we were bringing food items to this man who lived in the woods in a little cabin kind of place. And he told me not to say anything about the furniture. Now, I'm little, but I knew some things. So anyway, we get way back somewhere, who knows, and we walk into this cabin, which of course had the potbelly stove, but it was, as far as I know, it was one room. The furniture. The furniture were empty cases of beer. And they would be stacked, so this is a chair, and this is a couch. And whoever this man was, my father talked to him, seemed like a long time, but I'm a little girl, so maybe it wasn't. But anyway, he would talk to him, and apparently he knew him well. So this was something he always told me, was never to look down on people for the circumstances they're in, because you don't know their history. You don't, and besides, it's none of your business, but besides that, every person has a good something within them. And oh, the other thing my father said, if you know something that somebody did that was wrong, as long as it's not a serious wrong, like murder or something, you never tell on it. And there was somebody in high school at one time, can't remember the name of the person, who happened to be Jack and Deere. And I knew who it was. He asked me, I was in junior high because I was 13 when he died. He says, do you know who it is? And I, yeah. Who was it? No. And he asked me 2 or 3 times, different days. No. And finally, he caught the kid. It was a kid, you know. And after, he told me I did the right thing. So that was another lesson well learned. Of course, if it's serious, that's a different thing, but luckily I've never run into anything really major, so it's okay. Jack and Deere is one thing. I also knew, this is a big secret that's going to be in the thing, but I also knew that if there was a family with many children and the people were poor, my father would turn a blind eye, which I thought was very honorable.
Well, my mother lived right in later years. She purchased the house next door to the museum, so for several years we would have been coming here to visit her here, and I went with her to the dances at the town hall and to the quilting group that she was involved in, and became good friends with those ladies that she was involved with there as well.
This quilt was put together by a local ladies quilting group.
A poem by Hilda Moses, Holiday Season, 1993. Something to share. We, the Golden Girls, on Tuesdays we meet. We sew, crochet, or knit. Sometimes we just sit. Ideas we share, recipes we compare. We share our aches and pains, our spouse's mistakes, and often a story or two by you-know-who. Then it's off to the diner for coffee and toast. The waitress smiles and says, "How many of you?" We share laughter. Diets are discussed, but we find food is a must. And here we are, another year, and all so happy to be here.
We estimate the museum was built around 1850.
Okay.
First brick school.
First brick school.
Yeah, burned in 1934. It actually stood where the current school is. The new school was built later that year, 1934.
And this looks like the Masonic Lodge.
That's true.
Is that still here?
It's still here, still active. Yeah.
Great. Watering kettle.
Watering kettle. That was at the end of George Street. And it was, just like in the picture, was right in the center of the road. And in the 70s,
1870s?
in the 1970s,
1970s.
the Historical Association, in cooperation with the guys that work for the town, moved the water kettle. I guess it would be over here.
And down here we have First Methodist Church.
Methodist Church, which dissolved last year.
Oh.
Had been active since the 1820s.
We have down here the distillery.
Distillery. Okay. This was over by the gorge. Last people that owned the place was Walter Foster, and he was a taxidermist. The building burnt in 1977.
Remember him and all his critters.
You do?
Yes.
Creamery.
I think I remember seeing butter tubs by the gorge.
Yeah.
Baptist Church.
Baptist Church is still there, still very active.
Okay. Shine. Oh.
Shine Tucker's store.
I remember Shine Tucker. And who had the store before you did?
Doug Kirk, and then he got it from his father-in-law, Shine Tucker.
I even remember Shine Tucker.
Yeah. Shine Tucker, yeah.
I do too. By the old wood so good many times.
Yeah.
He had a little ice cream parlor in there. When we first got there, there was a big old ice house out back where they used to cut the ice from the river and store it for through the years, so that you always had ice. I remember when they cut the ice. It was out back of Rowena's in that little bay there. And then at one time in behind Rowena's, there was a whole bunch of sheds that at one time had held ice. Also, people used to come in still on Saturday night with their horses and get their groceries, their weekly groceries on Saturday night. And visit, I remember that. And go downtown, it was quite an event.
Good cheese too.
Yeah. Go down and get his cheese. And his salt pork. He made his own salt pork there. The barrels were still there.
That's the Catholic Church on School Street, which has also dissolved probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay, and the last one down here isn't labeled.
What do we have here? Oh, this is the gorge.
There it is in tapestry. What a beautiful thing this is.
The man that this town is named for, David Parrish, who came here in 1808 with the idea of land speculation. He was a businessman, a merchant. Purchased a 200,000 acre tract of wilderness here in northern New York, and by 1814 it was recognized as the town of Parishville. This is the old town hall, which burned in 1923
and was replaced by the new town hall that is here today. And here is the Parishville Fire Station, the new one.
This is the old fire station.
When I was little, before they had the big fire department that they have today, it was all volunteers, and the bell on the fire station that rang, and they rang the church bells to get people's attention. And then of course everybody went to watch the fire. Everybody went. So I went this one time. My dad was a fireman at the time, a volunteer, and he was also the town barber for many years in down here. But I went to watch this fire, of course, and I still see my dad up in the window, the front window, upstairs in this house. He'd gone up on the ladder, and I remember seeing him and hollering, "Dad, Dad, get out of there," because I could see the smoke. But also, he climbed up that ladder with his artificial limb, so it was quite a feat for that.
Did the rescue squad as well when I was first in.
Tell me a big adventure you had doing this.
There was a lady down on the Colton Road, County 58. We got called to, and she was in full arrest when we got there. And we did CPR to the hospital, and brought her back, and she was alive when we got to the hospital. And then on the other side of it, I mean, I've seen a lot of horror, and a lot of being in a small town. You see people you know or people you're related to. So sometimes it's hard. When it's kids, it's real hard.
It's real hard. In 1998, the North Country experienced a long and difficult freeze, an ice storm that knocked out electricity, knocked down trees, tested everyone's ability to make do.
My parents were out of power for, I think it was 13 days. And we were lucky we were only 3 days. But I mean, we were here in the North Country.
And I do know for a fact that in 1998 there was a huge freeze.
Yeah. I was still working for the DEC at that time and working in the woods, so that was quite a undertaking to try to salvage timber, just open it up so people could get through.
Homes were coated with ice, no power, no heat. All over town, people helped each other out. Andy Doby on Catherine Street had a phone that actually worked. The Wickwires, a few houses over, were able to cook. Barb Page of Reflections Restaurant, which had power, took people in, mostly from the senior housing unit, which had none.
All the people that stayed with us, I think the total was 24 of them. 24 people we had there at the time. We had the 2 bathrooms, and they had to do the old-fashioned wash-up. But they were fine with that. At their age, they were used to that a long time ago, and that's like they said, they were stepping back in time.
Okay.
And, but they had TV, they played cards, they had games to play. So in between their meals, there was break time, and then at nighttime it was everybody brushes their teeth, washes up, and then they slept in the big dining hall. I mean, that's the way it was.
Well, you did a wonderful thing, and you got to enjoy it too.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much.
So why Parishville?
My husband grew up in Parishville, and so did his family and his mother and his grandmother. And I met him. He joined the army and he came to Germany. We met in Germany, and we got married, and we had 2 boys, and we decided to move to Parishville and raise our children here.
Because your husband said that your children would be raised in Parishville.
Yes, they would be raised in Parishville because Parishville is a good town and has a good school. And it's worked out very well for us.
What was your first impression of the town when you came here?
Not much going on here.
What was your first impression of Parishville?
It was small. It was small, but what was the selling point when we were deciding on the house was when she took us down to the park and the beach area. It was just beautiful. And my kids used it a lot. I really liked that my kids could walk to school. I liked that they could ride their bikes all over, they could run all over. If they got in any trouble, somebody told me.
I'm Colin McIntosh. I'm Kenneth Reesrock. I'm Audrey Miguel. I'm Kennedy.
Okay, now, which of you lives across from the museum here? Okay, you live right here? Okay.
I live near here, 5 Shepherd Street.
Okay.
I live on George Street in the Big Red House. I live on White Hill Road.
Very good. What is your favorite part about living in Parishville?
I like all of the nice people here.
That's a good thing.
I like all the nice people here too. Me too. And I was born here and all my best friends are here.
I see them. Is there something that you know about Parishville that I never knew?
No. There's one thing I know that you might know, but I'm not quite sure. This guy, David Parrish, his brother, George, was named after George Street. Well, his name's named.
George Street was named after him. Okay, I never knew that. Any like really dramatic memories of Parishville?
Oh, I think lots. I mean, some of the dramatic ones are Halloween. I mean, we came here every Halloween and trick-or-treated every house. And you want to come over? Well, you could be into. And then the fire station would get all the fire trucks out, and everyone would ride in the back of the fire trucks in our costumes with the sirens wailing.
So any of you who've been gone and came back, do you have any impressions of Parishville now?
Yes, it's really pretty. A lot of the things have stayed the same, which it makes it really awesome, and some things have changed.
How do you think Parishville has changed in the years?
I don't know anybody anymore in Parishville.
Really? You just feel like you don't know anybody?
I only know the old ones that are, which we are now.
Which we are. Isn't that something? Isn't that impressive?
Yeah, yeah.
We made it.
No. I don't know how good we made it, but we made it.
We made it just fine. Look at us.
Yes, yes.
It's amazing the changes.
Tell me about them.
Well, just how different, how, you know, places have grown up, and just like the traffic, like where I live. I can remember being, that's my grandfather's farm. I remember being there with a kid, and you'd be lucky if you saw, I think the only truck we ever saw go by was the truck going to Ralph Christie's to pick up the milk, and now it's like almost a steady stream of trucks going by.
Have you lived here all your life?
No.
Where did you come from?
Syracuse.
When did you move here?
This year.
What do you like about Parishville?
Everything.
The interesting thing about Parishville is you can live in such a wonderful little town and still be connected to the rest of the universe with computer technology and such. I mean, I'm creating guitars for people all over the world. I have the unique pleasure of being able to do custom inlay work for celebrities and musicians and rock stars, and you know, all right out of my basement in Parishville. So
That's pretty cool.
It's a pretty tremendous thing.
I'm very happy to be here, and I love living in Parishville, and I love the river, and I really think Parishville has a lot of potential for the future. It's been kind of ignored. But I really think that there's a chance that it could become more of a, you know, an artist and recreational community.
We raised our family here, my wife and I. Both our boys went to school. Great school, great little community.
So what makes you stay in Parishville?
It's home.
But you've been other places, you said.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you come back?
Because it's home.